Hi, friends. It's your girl Harpo. Welcome to this episode of Brown Girl Guilt titled It's Literally My Life. Literally, it's my life. In case you didn't know that, it's my life. And in case you didn't know that, it's your life. Now, that's kind of it's a very broad title, but we're going to get into it in just a second. This season at Brown Girl Guild, we're exploring teenage fever. We're talking about what it's like to be a teenager. Not literally, I guess. Actually, yeah, that's a lie. Literally, yes. We are exploring what it means to be a teenager, and we're going all the way back to what it was like to be 14 and 15 and experience all the things that we were experiencing as a teenager. And the reason we're doing this is because A, I feel like I'm going through a second puberty in life right now as a 25-year-old. And B, we feel that this not knowingness that you have when you're a teenager, where everything is confusing and, you can be experiencing certain events or things or feelings or emotions for the first time. You might be exploring your body for the first time, or you're exploring your body in a different way. Whatever that emotion of, and that feeling and that sense of not knowingness is that you experience as a teenager isn't something that you only experience when you're that young. It can happen at so many different stages of your life. It can happen when you're 21, you're 25, it can happen when you're 45, and even when you're 65. This not knowingness can happen all the time. It's not just when you're a teenager. And so this season, we've covered a lot of different things that we've experienced as teenagers that we still might experience now. And one of them is this sense of disembodiment. It's this feeling of not feeling like your body is your own. When you're a teenager and you're going through puberty for the first time, and you're also exploring the confinements of what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do, you can experience a lot of disembodiment. And that disembodiment doesn't end just then, right? You might still be experiencing all of that later on in life. So I want to take it back to elementary school. I know I wasn't a teenager in elementary school, but I feel like for me, this idea of disembodiment, particularly as it connects to my body, starts in elementary school. So I remember in grade 5, I went out and got a haircut. It was probably one of the first like monumental haircuts that I got. And I feel like most of us remember like our first monumental haircuts. I mean, I think like maybe our parents might get haircuts for us when we're kids, but the first haircut that you get to do, like you are the one that pleaded for or asked for or had active participation in, is kind of like a monumental haircut, especially for brown girls. So in grade 5, I got my hair cut. I remember I got bangs. I'd been, begging and pleading to get bangs for the longest time. I finally got bangs and I cut like a significant chunk off the bottom of my hair. And I came to school and I feel like it was like recess or lunch. And I really liked playing tetherball. So I walked up to like the tetherball area and there were these older girls there and they looked at me and looked at my new haircut and they said, "Your dad let you cut your hair?" And I was like, "Yeah? Like, what do you mean?" I was so confused. I was so perplexed. I was like, "What do you mean? Like, what do you mean my dad let me cut my hair? Like, let me. Of It's just hair." I didn't understand. And the begging and pleading for me wasn't like for permission. It was just like, I want to get bangs. I want to get bangs. I was just like adamant because I probably saw someone on TV with bangs. And so I was so confused because even then, even though I didn't have the language to understand it in this way, I was really perplexed because I'm like, "What do you mean he let me cut my hair? He doesn't own my hair. Like, he doesn't own my head." And I was so confused at the time. And it was so jarring because I think most of the girls that were asking me that question, it was rooted in an experience of not having that sort of relationship or permission with their own hair at home. And I was so confused about where that sentiment was actually coming from. And I felt like that was sort of like my, I guess, like understanding that I was living a very different life because I was allowed to cut my hair, but that there's this sense of disembodiment that so many of us as brown girls experience all the time. And hair is such an interesting thing, right? I feel like, I mean, yes, I didn't have to ask for permission to cut my hair, but now when I think about it, when I was in elementary school, even in like early high school, I always had to ask for permission to like let my hair down. Like I remember asking my mom that morning before going to school, and I would say to her in Punjabi, "मैं अपने बाल खुले छੱਡ सकਦੀ ਹਾਂ ਅੱਜ?" And I would ask my mom, like, "Can I leave my hair down? Can I open my hair?" And I remember it being like such a nerve-wracking thing. I don't understand it now because that's literally how I wear my hair and I don't think about it twice now as an adult. But at the time, I feel like letting your hair down or going to school with your hair open was like such a big deal. And I remember if I did do it, whether it was like a family event or something, even the aunties would be like, "Le, tu to bade baal khule chhade ho aaj," right? They'd be like, "Oh, like look at you, your hair's down." And I don't understand why it's such a big deal for us to have our hair down. There's like a slut shaming that sort of happens to kids who have their hair down. Like I know that sounds like really dramatic, but it's true. That's how it feels that like you're being slut shamed to like let your hair down. Even if you think about like Kal Ho Na Ho, right? That one scene where Nana comes down the stairs and she's about to go on a date. First of all, I'm just gonna back up for a second. She was about to go on a date with Rohit. And like it's like they've never been on like a date before. He proposed to her on the first date. Anyway, side story. But anyway, that scene where Nana is coming down the stairs and she's about to go on a date with Rohit and her hair is like in a clip and then Aman goes and he takes the clip out and like puts her hair down. It's like such a sensual moment. And even then you thought like when you're watching it as a young person, like, ooh, that's so sexy. Put her hair down. Her hair is down. Why is putting your hair down like a sensual, sexy thing? I don't understand. But anyway, I feel like as children, our parents obviously have a lot of jurisdiction over us. And of course, like, why not, right? We're their children. They gave birth to us, they brought us into this world. We're mere children. We're like 12 years old and we don't know that much about the world. But it's interesting that so many of our parents feel so entitled over us, right? And some of you might be parents now and listening to this and think, yeah, like I feel like I have a sense of entitlement over my kids. But I feel like the way that our parents have entitlement over us, especially as brown girls, is really interesting because I feel like it's directly connected to our personhood, right? It's directly connected to what we're allowed to do or not allowed to do with our bodies. Like literally my body, and the way that I move through my life with my body is really governed and put into certain sort of restrictions that my parents have set out for us or my parents have set out for me. And I feel like it starts so early. It starts even before we're born. If I look back to, how I was named, how my brother was named. I mean, put aside the idea that like we get our parent, like our father's last names, but even the way that I was named was something that was, like our parents own that too, right? Especially, I think like my dad really owned even the way that I was named. Like my mom really didn't have that much of a say in how her kids were named or what her kids were named, but my dad was the one that had the final say. And the reason I bring that up is because even in the way that those girls asked me at that tetherball court or whatever, your dad let you cut your hair insinuates that my dad has a sense of ownership over me. It's that my dad owns me. And that is not new information. Like it's really not that bizarre to believe because that's what patriarchy is, bro. Like that's literally patriarchy. I feel like I want to break down patriarchy in this episode for a second because I feel like I use it often. You might hear it often, and you might not actually fully understand what patriarchy is. So, big sis Harpo or little sis Harpo, depending on how old you are when you're listening to this, and like maybe if you have a crush on me, that I'm not your sis at all. But anyway, what is patriarchy? I'm going to break it down for you. So, patriarchy, in definition, is a system of society or government in which the father or the eldest male is the head of the family and the descent of the family is traced through the male line. It's the idea that there is a head of the family, right? So when you have the head of a family, of a state, of a government, that is patriarchal because to be patriarchal is to have a head of state. And so this head of state owns property, they own assets, they everything, like all ownership of everything is under this person's name, right? They're the breadwinner, they make the most amount of money per se, and so then therefore everything that is to be owned is theirs. And that also translates over to their dependents too, because if they're the ones providing and they're the ones that have the means to provide, then in theory, under a patriarchal family, society, government, then the dependents are also belonging to the head of state. And so if you think about it, that's why we ask our dads for permission. That's why they call the shots because they're the head of our family. You ever feel like, when you have to ask something of your parents, It's like the last say is your dad's, right? Like you might go to your mom, you might go to your dad. And this might not be the case for everybody, right? Like not everyone's families are like this. I know my family was like this. All of my cousins' families were like this. And then all my friends, their families were like this too. There was nobody that I knew in my circle whose mom got the last word. But when you have to ask your dad for the last word, where you can like ask your mom and let's say she says no, but your dad says yes, you're like, oh, dad said yes, I can go to the party, bye. Or like your mom says, yeah, of course you can cut your hair, but your dad's like, no, you can't. That is patriarchy. That's patriarchy in action. And I think that the justifications for all of that is like, well, your dad works hard. He goes out and he makes a living. Like he has all these things that he takes care of. So like, yeah, dad gets to have the last say. But to be honest, that's not fair, right? That's really not fair. And I know personally that's something that I started to really grapple with when I turned like 16, 17. And then when I came into my like feminist consciousness, I was like, that's not fair. Just because, yes, he goes out and he's a breadwinner and the mortgage is under his name doesn't mean that he technically owns all of us, because what that does is strip all of us of our personhood, right? And then, what else also ends up happening is that every decision that you make is predicated on this person's approval, right? And so while we're children, that's okay in some cases, right? Like, of course, when I have a 12-year-old tomorrow, not tomorrow, but like one day when I have a 12-year-old, obviously like they're 12, right? And I'm going to be hopefully not like old. Like I want to have children in the next few years. But when I have a 12-year-old, I want them to be able to be okay with the way that I'm guiding them, right? So that I'm not saying that our parents should have no jurisdiction over us. They should have no control over what we do. But there's some things that I feel like as specifically as a brown girl, the too much ho gaya, right? Like too much ho gaya. For example, when I was 16, I wanted to go to a karaoke party. So I went to a karaoke party. And the entire time, my dad was just being like a weirdo about it. Like he was just being some type of way about it. And he was like, okay, well, if you're going to go to this karaoke party, well, you need to text me the address and I'm going to come. I was like, no, like you're not coming. It's a boy girl party, right? People are gonna be drinking, people are gonna be rolling weed. Like you're not coming. And I didn't think that, not like any of those things were like bad per se, but I don't know why. I just thought that my dad he was gonna have a fit about it. I was gonna get in trouble. So even though my dad had asked me to send the address of the karaoke place, I never texted him. He kept texting me, he kept calling me, and I just didn't send it to him because I was terrified that he was gonna show up. And the thing about my dad that I've learned now as an adult is ਗੱਲਾਂ, right? Bas ਛੱਡਦਾ ਹੀ ਆ, right? Like he's not gonna actually show up. But I was so terrified and that I didn't want to send it to him. I remember getting into so much trouble for that, for not texting him. And everything that I did after that, I had to ask for permission for. Everywhere I went, whether it was Save on Foods to go buy deli meat, whether it was to my cousin's house, whether it was to the mall to buy a bra, right? Like obviously I was gonna tell my dad, hey, I'm going to Victoria's Secret. But everything that I did, I had to run through my dad. And it's because I broke his trust, right? So of course, like those were the consequences of what I did. So I couldn't get mad at him. But everything that I wanted to do, I had to start asking for his permission. I had to start seeking for permission. And it created a sense of guilt inside of me. So no matter what I did, no matter how much time I spent out of the house, because I had to ask for permission, I didn't want to have to ask for permission to just move around, right? To do things. But I felt like I had to because this is whose person's house I lived in. This is the roof under which I lived. This is the person that provided for me. And I had to ask for permission to do like the most simplest of things. And I didn't like that. I feel like I didn't like it because it created such a strong emotion of guilt inside of me that prevented me from enjoying just like the smallest of things, right? But the fact that we have to ask for permission for all these things, it carries into the way that we experience pleasure in our bodies as well, right? And this overwhelming sense of guilt all the time isn't just when you're stepping out of the house, it's when you're doing things to your body, it's when you're experiencing things in your body. I posted on Instagram, I wanted to ask, I said, what things did you have to ask for permission when it came to your body when you were younger, or not even younger, like anytime? Like, what are some things that you had to actively seek permission from your parents and especially your dad as a brown girl, as a woman growing up? And the answers are so similar. Like I would say close to 100 messages, and they're all the same. And so I'm going to read out some of them, and the most common ones. So removing your facial hair was something that you weren't allowed to do. So can you imagine like not like not even being allowed to shave your mocha, okay, getting your eyebrows done, or like removing the hair on your legs, like you weren't allowed to do those things. um Hairstyles, like hair was the number one thing. Every single girl that responded, every single person that responded said that they weren't allowed to modify their hair, whether it was cutting it, whether it was like putting it down, whether it was dyeing it. They weren't allowed to do any of that, right? Some people also said that they weren't allowed to like hang out with the person of the opposite sex. They weren't allowed to have sex before marriage, which, duh, obviously not. None of us have sex until we're married, right? They weren't allowed to have tattoos. They weren't allowed to get piercings. They weren't allowed to use tampons. They weren't even allowed to use tampons. Oh my God. Like, brown girls, we weren't allowed to use tampons. That's wild to me. Like, we weren't even allowed to have agency over how we experienced our menstruation. That is bizarre, right? And so, like going to your friend's house, going for a sleepover, going for a trip with your friends, wearing makeup, what you eat and what you watch. Like one of my friends was sharing a story about how she wasn't even allowed to watch the Family Channel growing up because her parents and her family thought that like Wizards of Waverly Place and Sweet Life of Zach and Cody was bad. I had a family friend who wasn't allowed to listen to Gore the Gane, like truly wasn't allowed to listen to Gore the Gane, listen to the radio, watch MTV because it was a bad influence. And that's bizarre to me. Like now, I mean, obviously, like I also grew up with a sense of control. There were a lot of things that I wasn't allowed to do. There were a lot of things that I wasn't allowed to participate in. Like I really wasn't allowed to sleep over at friends' houses growing up, and there was a lot of things that I had to actively seek permission for when I was growing up. But I think it's bizarre to look back now and to think that these are all the places that we had no control over, right? Like these were all the places that we weren't allowed to exercise our own agency and experience ourselves. Like my hair is such an important part of who I am. You know, when I walk around now, people are like, "Oh my God, I love your hair." We get into a room and that's the first thing we notice about you is your hair. And that's because I really prioritize getting blowouts, bro. Like I love them. I feel like a Bollywood, Hollywood goddess. But the fact that, my relationship with my hair could have been impacted by the what I was allowed to do it and not allowed to do with it by because of what my identity is, right? Like because I'm a brown girl and because my parents thought I wasn't allowed to do it. It's just crazy to me that we weren't able to spread out and actually experience what it is that we truly want. It's the problem of all of this is that it's jarring because we don't have enough space to explore our own limits. Like we spend so much time exploring and pushing against the limits of the people in our lives, our parents, that we don't even get to explore the limits of ourselves. Like you don't even get to know what it is that you like, what you don't like, because you've never actually had permission to do it, right? You might not even like bangs. Your booty might not even be meant for bangs, right? Like you might not even be the kind of person that looks good with front bangs, but you would never know that. You would never know that because you never got the chance to try that, right? And so it's wild to me that we weren't allowed to make decisions of our own body because it's literally my body. It's literally the body that I'm going to experience the world through and I'm going to live my life through. And I'm not even allowed to do whatever I want to it. And the example that I always think of is when you rent something from somebody, right? Let's say you're renting a home, like you're renting a basement suite or you're renting an apartment from someone. Somebody else owns it. And so you're paying rent month to month. And if you want to, let's say, paint the walls, you want to put holes in the wall because you want to hang up paintings or art, you want to change the carpet. You can't do those things without permission. You have to ask the landlord because the landlord owns the place that you're staying in, right? You live there, you can make a home of it, but only to a certain extent. You can't go in and modify it without the permission of the person who actually owns it. And so, why is that the case for our bodies, right? So, if I want to paint the walls, if I want to have tattoos, if I want to put holes in the walls, I want to get piercings, I want to change the carpet, I want to modify things, I want to get my hair cut. Why do I have to ask for permission when I'm not paying rent to exist in my body? I occupy my body as an occupant. Like it's crazy to me. Truly, I don't think I'll ever be able to fully understand when and how we thought it was okay for us to set limitations on the way that other people experience their bodies. It goes back to the other thing that I think about all the time, where you would never catch me ever making a comment about somebody's body. You would never hear me say you've gained weight or you've lost weight or you've grown this that. Like, you would never hear me do that because it's not my place. It's not my body. I don't occupy it. I don't exist in it. And yet we are so open and comfortable with doing that to people all the time when we're not occupying their bodies. And to think that we have the permit, like we have to seek permission from our fathers. Like we have to ask permission to just experience pleasure, joy, love and care in our bodies. I feel like I've walked around disembodied for so many years in my own body, and probably not to the extent of what many of you experienced, because, I had a little bit of agency around what I was allowed to do in my body. But in some ways, there's so many things that I wasn't allowed to. I feel like I have such a disconnect from my body. Like, I don't even know how to explain this, but like, it's going to sound silly and dramatic, but like sometimes, like, when I think maybe 2 years ago, I started to properly moisturize my body. Like, I'm not even gonna lie. I started to properly moisturize my body. I started to like not, I'm not gonna say that I didn't do this sexually, but I started to like actually touch my body, in a non sexual way. But to like really touch my body and to be like, this is my body, these are my arms, this is my back. And, actually look at like what my toes look like, what my legs look like, stand in front of the mirror and look at what my ass looks like. I didn't even know for the longest time that I had a beauty mark on my butt cheek. I didn't even know that because I just existed in such a disembodied, disconnected way from my body. And that's so harmful because if we only exist in our minds, like if you just, while you're listening to this, if you think about, place yourself in your body for a second. And if you only ever exist in your face, like if you only ever occupy the world and exist in the world through your mind, you're doing yourself a disservice. You're doing your human experience such a disservice because this body was granted to us for us to experience it. But when we're not allowed to do what we want to it, not move it in the way that we want to, modify it in the way that we want to, that's some bullshit. That's some straight up such bullshit. A question that I asked a few years ago that actually left one of my older friends, my friend who's in her 40s, stunted. Like she was shook to her core. A question that I asked publicly at an event that I was hosting was, whose body is my body really? If it's not my body, whose body is it really? And she was shook because she thought, wow, like I've never even been allowed to think that. And your generation is saying that. And it's so radical. It feels so radical to be able to ask the question of, whose body is my body really? If it's not mine, then whose is it? And do they get to have it? Right? How much of my body is theirs? And so I just want to say that the next time you're feeling cognitive dissonance around the decisions around your body, remind yourself that this is your body, right? Like really sit down. And when someone's trying to say something to you about your body, and as women, I feel like it goes on forever, right? Like all the time. Like it's not just around what we're allowed to have permission around. It can be around like our weight. It can be about, the way that we're looking and feeling, even because we bear children, like the way that our bodies function or they don't function, whether we're able to have children or not have children, how our bodies carry these children, or how we age, right? How our bodies age, how they look when they start to age, the body hair that we have, whether you're in your 50s and you're going through menopause. Anytime that someone is trying to make you feel like your body is not your own and they're participating in a sense of entitlement or ownership over your body, I want you to sit down and I want you to anchor into the idea that this is your body. Remind yourself, this is my body and I get to do whatever the fuck I want to do with this body. Truly, be that dramatic. It's a reclamation after years and years of not being able to do what we want to do with our bodies, not make the decisions that we want to make with them, living a life of disembodiment. Sit yourself down and tell yourself, this is my body. Because we have to live with the consequences, right? Like I have to live with the consequences of it. I'm dairy free. People tell me all the time, yo man, just have a fucking piece of cheese. Who cares? Like da da da. Like why don't you just have cheese pizza? Who cares? It's like, no. You don't get to tell me that about my body. Again, I'm being dramatic, but it's true, right? Because I have to live with the consequences of it. I have to be the one whose stomach hurts, right? And who's uncomfortable, who's withering in pain afterwards. And I'm the one who has to wake up with the consequences, with the consequences and the decisions of my body, and I'm the one that has to go to sleep with it. Nobody else, right? I also want us to be really mindful of how we're passing that along to the people in our lives. I'm so bad for this because I understand that for myself, right? I understand how I want to occupy my own body. But, I have a younger brother who's significantly younger than me. He's 8 years younger than me. And when he wants to experiment with his body, I catch myself policing him. I catch it and I rectify it. But my initial reaction is always to police him. I mean, of course, like as a 17-year-old, when he wanted a neck tattoo, I think it was my place as an older sister to be like, maybe you shouldn't get a neck tattoo at 17. But everything else that he wants to experience and he wants to, try with his body is his decision, right? And so we have to catch ourselves and be mindful of how we're policing other people and passing that along. And to that end, I want to leave us all with this affirmation. Anytime that you're being asked to uproot yourself out of your body, ground yourself back in. Lay those roots, put them down real tight so that nobody can uproot you. And remind yourself that this is literally my body. This is literally my life.